Horror movies have been knocking it out of the park in 2023, winning over critics and making a killing at the box office. Evil Dead Rise, Talk to Me and Megan are just a few standouts of the year so far. On the other hand, there are plenty of other horror films which sadly flopped, and flopped hard, whether that's down to being outright awful or due to poor promotion and marketing. With that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movies that flopped hard in 2023. Number 10, Run Rabbit Run. Run Rabbit Run follows fertility doctor Sarah as she becomes concerned when her daughter Mia begins identifying as her long-lost aunt. Dana Reed's mind-bending thriller had potential due to its simple but intriguing premise. Rather than do something bold and daring though, Run Rabbit Run tosses in every trope imaginable. Like, you can only use creepy kid drawings and forced jump scares so often before they're just not scary anymore. Such cliches would be more forgiving if the story here wasn't so flimsy. While there are some great themes to explore, including childhood trauma and family burdens, Run Rabbit Run sadly never really sinks its teeth into anything insightful. Number 9, Beau is Afraid. Even though Ari Aster's Hereditary and Midsommar were critically acclaimed, neither managed to bank $100 million at the box office. And since Beau is Afraid is the horror auteur's most divisive feature yet, the bonkers tragicomedy always had an uphill battle to make a dent at the box office. Now, that doesn't mean Beau is Afraid is a swing and a miss, of course. The way Aster explores themes of neglect and self-loathing may be unconventional, but it's also riveting and surprisingly relatable, primarily because of Joaquin Phoenix's towering performance. But with its 3-hour runtime and slow pacing, it's understandable why this surreal adventure had a hard time finding its audience. Despite only costing $35 million, Beau is Afraid failed to make a profit, bringing in less than a third of its budget. Number 8, Fear. And now for Fear, Deon Taylor's scare-free horror that sees a group of friends coming face to face with their inner demons while in a secluded lodge. Now, the director has to be commended for putting this whole thought together during a pandemic and distributing it independently. Sadly, Taylor's efforts though were for naught. The filmmaker injects headache-inducing noises in nearly every scene, and all this does is invoke frustration more than scares. Instead of making the ensemble's personal fears the meat of the story, Fear instead focuses on a virus, which feels needlessly tacked on here. Even though Fear had virtually no competition upon its release, it failed to crack into the top 10 at the box office. It was out of theaters in under a month, earning a measly $2.1 million. Number 7, Snow Falls. 5 badly written characters head to a remote cabin to celebrate the new year in Colton Tran's Snow Falls. After a snowstorm hits the area, the cabin loses power and heating, causing the group to turn on each other. And that's it. If you were hoping for some tension and it would be derided from this premise, you'd be sorely mistaken. Compounding Snow Falls' profound lack of scares are the characters themselves. All they do is spout the same 1 or 2 lines, which are meant to represent their entire personality. For instance, the influencer doesn't shut up about his followers, the daredevil keeps talking about living on the edge, man, and the med student repeatedly reminds everyone that she's a med student. Not only are these details boring, they don't factor into the story in any meaningful way. Also, there isn't even that much snow here. Based on how the gang talk about the weather, viewers are expecting to see a tundra. Instead, there's not enough frost to make a decent snowman. Number 6, Cobweb. Seth Rogen has been a bit of a juggernaut recently, producing Invincible, The Boys, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem in the last few years. The Superbad star also tossed his hat into horror this year, producing the Edgar Allan Poe-inspired Cobweb. The trailers and promotional material were crammed with every Halloween motif imaginable, including jack-o'-lanterns, trick-or-treaters, and pumpkin patches. As such, it seems sensible for Cobweb to be released in October. Although that was the original idea, the spooky thriller was shoved into a July slot with little warning, where it had to contend against $200 million blockbusters. And if tentpole movies like Transformers, Indiana Jones, Fast X, The Flash, and Mission Impossible underperformed, what chance did an indie horror have when sandwiched between them? But that's not the only reason why Cobweb bombed. It pretty much had to rely on zero marketing, meaning it flew under the radar of a lot of moviegoers. And failing to make a splash, Cobweb was dumped onto digital formats after a mere 3-week run at theaters. Number 5, Infinity Pool. Brandon Cronenberg has proven himself to be just as fierce a filmmaker as his legendary father with such work as Antiviral and Possessor. And his most recent feature, Infinity Pool, is again a perfect blend of psychological horror and twisted sci-fi. Unfortunately, great films don't always translate into great box office, especially when competing against Avatar: The Way of Water. Infinity Pool also had to compete against films like Plane, Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and A Man Called Otto. Sadly, 1 week after its release, Infinity Pool was out of the box office top 10, earning only $5 million. To Brandon Cronenberg's credit, Infinity Pool is the most successful movie of his career so far. On top of that, it outgrossed his father's latest feature, Crimes of the Future. Sadly, these observations don't change the fact that Infinity Pool was a commercial bomb. Number 4. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. The Last Voyage of the Demeter is an adaptation of a single chapter from Bram Stoker's Dracula. In this passage, a ship captain writes about a vampiric stowaway on his vessel, picking off his shipmates. Although Dracula has been adapted countless times over the decades, this section of the book is rarely elaborated upon, since it only gets a fleeting mention in the source material. But now, we have a whole movie divulging every detail about the doomed expedition. Even though it's a neat idea, The Last Voyage of the Demeter has a few blatant problems. Firstly, this horror movie came out in the summer. Secondly, it got a very mixed reception from critics and audiences. However, the biggest problem is the title. While those well versed with the novel would know The Last Voyage was a Dracula adaptation, those less familiar may have been more confused. Realizing their folly, Last Voyage was retitled with Dracula at the beginning of the title for the international release. This strategy though sadly made little difference since The Last Voyage of the Demeter performed dramatically worse in other territories. It was also pulled from distribution in the UK due to Lionsgate's acquisition of E1, meaning it lost another territory to generate box office receipts in. In the end, this $45 million budgeted feature failed to make even half of its money back. Number 3. Consecration. In Consecration, a doctor is summoned to an isolated convent after her priest brother seemingly took his own life. When she discovers her sibling was involved in a murder investigation prior to his death, she instantly suspects foul play. Consecration has all the right materials to cook up a solid horror. It's got a captivating premise, a top-notch lead, and a few decent scares. Sadly, things just never fully seem to come together. The narrative structure is unnecessarily confusing, the twist is extremely predictable, and the story is never as intriguing as it arguably should be. Jenna Malone and Danny Huston do their best to elevate the wafer-thin material here, but that's not enough to salvage Consecration. It's genuinely shocking how badly this film turned out, since director Christopher Smith has previously shown a knack for imaginative horror with the likes of Triangle and Severance, two excellent underrated films. Number 2. Renfield. Boy, Dracula's not having a good year, is he? Nicolas Cage was simply born to play Dracula, with the star's over-the-top style lending itself particularly perfectly to the legendary Bloodsucker. True to form, Cage commits fully to the role here, constantly reminding everyone the immense threat Dracula poses. As a result, you'd think his loyal fanbase would jump at the opportunity to see Cage portraying the Prince of Darkness in Chris McKay's Renfield. This comedy horror is far from perfect, but there's a lot to appreciate here. By exploring Drac's relationship with Renfield, viewers get to see a personal side to the two iconic characters that's rarely been conveyed before. With tight screenwriting, creative action, and plenty of heart, Renfield felt like a winner. Sadly, of its $65 million budget, the film only banked $26 million, making Renfield, sadly, a major flop. Number 1. Haunted Mansion. Due to the abysmal reception to 2003's Haunted Mansion, the odds were always stacked against this do-over. Despite the solid cast and impressive trailers, audiences were still very wary of this project. Surprisingly, the latest version was nowhere near the disaster it could have been. 2023's Haunted Mansion has a strong script, solid performances, and pushes the horror angle more than expected, especially considering the story is geared towards a younger demographic. In the end, Haunted Mansion earned $100 million, meaning it made more than every entry on this list so far combined. But because it cost over $150 million, Haunted Mansion likewise lost more money than any other horror feature this year. So what went wrong? No other major features were released the same week as Haunted Mansion, save for Talk to Me. So why didn't it do better? Well, Haunted Mansion's failure can be summarized in one made-up word: Barbenheimer. It's no secret Barbie and Oppenheimer obliterated the summer box office this year, raking in over $2 billion between them. In hindsight, it was unwise, even foolish, to release a reboot of a terrible movie based on a theme park ride just 1 week after Barbie and Oppenheimer hit the silver screen. So that's 10 horror movies that flopped hard in 2023. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, turn those notification bells on, and come and give us a follow on X at What Culture Horror. While you're there, you can find myself at Culture Left Peg, but most importantly, be sure to have the very best possible day. Whether you're doing something or whether you're doing absolutely nothing at all, I really do hope it goes well for you. And if things aren't going so well, I really do hope they turn around as soon as possible. I've been Andrew Pollard from What Culture Horror, and I'll catch you down the road.